I'm Zahur Raza, and tonight I'm joined by Dr. Barah Mikail to discuss Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's speech to Congress. Dr. Mikail is the Associate Professor at St. Louis University in Madrid and is the Director of the Program of Political Science and International Relations there. He is also the founding director of Strategia, which is a consulting firm focused on Middle East and North African politics as well as Spanish political dynamics. Let's start with Netanyahu's speech to Congress. He has now addressed a joint session of Congress 4 times. Speaking to such a powerful governing body on the planet obviously lends him legitimacy and appearance of power on the international stage. Given that the International Criminal Court is pursuing arrest warrants against him for charges including extermination, using starvation as a method of war, and deliberately targeting civilians, why does the US continue to provide such a prestigious platform to him?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we can see that there are lots of contradicting sign and signals from Washington, from a country that claims that it is like standing with the rights, the human rights and the rights of the oppressed, and at the same time just giving this platform, as you mentioned, to the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. But I think that there is something structural that goes back to many decades ago, at least to the beginning of the 50s, when we've had the American administration that has started shaping and has started developing its Middle Eastern policy through the interest of Israel, meaning that Israel was seen or started being seen as a country that could back actually the American policy in the Middle East. When I say the beginning of the 1950s, that's also because this is where we had the famous pro-Israeli lobby shaping and like taking form in the US. And we know that up to now, IPAC, this famous pro-Israeli lobby, is a lobby that has an impact that definitely is like can have a lots of influence on the U.S. administrations, independently from whether they are Republican or Democrat. And then third thing, it is from 1967 onwards with the famous Six-Day War, where Israel almost expanded to fourfold compared to what the UN has recognized to Israel as a territory. Starting from 1967, from this war in itself, this is where the U.S. decided to be totally siding with Israel and to be defending Israel. So what I mean is that there is no easy answer for this question, but what is sure is that we have a combination of factors that include, on the one hand, the institutional and the structural level within the US, where we have a strong pro-Israeli lobby, and on the other hand, we have a US that has kind of connected its own interests to the interests of Israel, and that considers that there is no way of stepping back from backing Israel, because Israel is a country important to defend and a country that is important when it comes to definitely having a long run I would say a long-run policy that could count on Israelis in order for the US to keep present in the region and to keep developing their different interests and assets. So this is more or less the combination that we have there. It is not unique. It is not unique to the US. You have many, look at the European countries in general, it's just like starting with France that claims that they defend human rights, etc., the country of the human rights, but at the same time, there is also this strong leaning towards defending Israel. We could talk about Germany, etc. There are many issues that are there, but in a nutshell, I think that what we have there is a combination of several factors that unfolded through decades and that got us to have definitely this institutional particularity that comes together with a kind of identification from Western countries towards an Israel that has a majority of Western people, as we know.
Back in 2015, nearly 60 Democrats boycotted Netanyahu's speech. This time around, 230 anonymous Senate and House staffers signed a letter urging them to protest or boycott his speech. Even in Israel, there were large demonstrations in Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Jerusalem calling on Netanyahu not to visit Washington. What message is Netanyahu trying to convey to the American public when his leadership is being rejected by his own people?
Yeah, since the attacks of the 7th of October 2023, there were a starting point when it comes to this cycle of violence that we are seeing. But we shouldn't forget that violence and war and tensions and disagreements started way before, even before the creation of the State of Israel. So we have a long run perspective where violence has always been structural and we've had some peaks. That said, starting from the 7th of October, which was a kind of a huge event where definitely Israelis got an event or got attacked in a way that was unexpected. What we saw is that, I mean, my take on this one is that the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had to, and he said it himself actually indirectly, he had to definitely find a way for guaranteeing his political survival. And I think that while the strategy that he is developing is not a strategy that responds only to the political survival that he's seeking for, because I think Benjamin Netanyahu is convinced that he has to go for wars in order for him to make the difference and to make Arabs understand and so on and so forth. I mean, there is a kind of racist approach to perspectives, to be honest. But at the same time, Netanyahu definitely has been and is still willing to guarantee his political survival. So that been the 7th of October. Then now over the last few hours or little days, there's been also the attack on the Golan, where Israel is accusing Hezbollah of being behind it. And we see that this is a further reason for Israel to say, you see, we are not safe. We have to react, and you have to back us. And this is where the connection with Iran is being done again by Israel. Why? Because I think Israel needs to claim that, okay, we see that there is a massacre of Palestinians. Not many people believe that these Palestinians are responsible or are threatening towards Israel and Israelis in general. Okay, it could be some attacks, etc., some people dying. Of course, everything is condemnable, but beyond that, Israel is stronger than Palestinian territories. So I think that Israel needs to use also a country such as Iran to say, you see, the threat is all around. We have the Palestinians, we have the Syrians, we have Hezbollah, and we also have Iran. So in change, I think that what Israelis seek is to keep having strong countries or having countries that make the difference, just backing them when it comes to their claiming that they need more weapons and also that they need more political support. And here I think that there is something important that we shouldn't miss at the same time. It is true, Israel and the US are strong allies. Let's say that the priority number one for Israelis is to convince Washington that Israel has to be backed. But at the same time, let us not forget that Israel did not close the door and did not enter into tensions with countries such as Russia or China, for example, because it knows that despite the fact that China is trying to operate a reconciliation between the different Palestinian factions, or despite the fact that Russia is still sympathetic to the Palestinian cause to a certain extent, at least, well, Israel knows that it needs the voice of the powerful within the Security Council in order for them to veto anything that would be too threatening, I would say, for Israel. You see, so this is where we have a combination of different things, where I would say that the main word or the main key element actually is definitely the one that gets us back to leadership and political leadership, actually, and making the difference by being backed by countries that are worth enough or strong enough when it comes to military means and when it comes to diplomatic means too.
The Capitol Police arrested over 200 American citizens for exercising their First Amendment right to protest Netanyahu's visit. Don't you think it's outrageous that the US government is prioritizing the interests of a foreign leader over the First Amendment right of its own citizens?
Well, I mean, there is no doubt that we have lots of contradictions when it comes to the way the US administration is acting towards its own citizens. And definitely the breaches to the First Amendment are many. But I mean, what is interesting also is to see that when it comes to the Israeli question or the Israeli-Arab relations and conflicts in general, this is where we seem to have the US administration being worried and saying, okay, this is where we have to intervene. So nothing fair within all of this. That's for sure. But I think that interestingly, this is an indication of the degree of, I would say, of fear that this Biden administration has, meaning that they know that they haven't acted in a way that is popular, and this is where they have tried to step back a bit from their initial approach, but without really, I would say, navigating the other way around, which is what many people were expecting. You know, when we say stop the genocide. we can discuss genocide or not, etc. But there is a massacre going on there. And so there, of course, the Biden administration has not been up to what many expected, even when it comes to the Democrats, or even when it comes to many Jewish American citizens, actually, that happen to be sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. And we also forget about this. So definitely, to answer your question, there is an abuse, obviously, and an abuse from a country that, once again, tells you we guarantee your freedom of speech. That's the way it goes, unfortunately, and one can only hope that one day there will be a kind of waking up when it comes to the fact that the US is showing too much contradiction, especially when it comes to the way it is dealing with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Nathan Hirsch is the former managing director of Partners for Progressive Israel, and he writes in one of his articles that Netanyahu isn't going to Washington representing Israel, he is representing himself, but he may end up representing Israel. By taking Noah Argamani, who is one of the recently freed hostages by the IDF, despite a lot of the family members of hostages calling on Netanyahu not to go to Washington, do you think Netanyahu is using these hostages as a prop to boost his image?
Well, I mean, the obvious is that since the beginning, many of the parents of the hostages taken by Hamas in the Palestinian territories and the Gaza Strip have been demonstrating, and have been just asking, for no big violence spiral to open, and for this government to be as responsible as possible, even if it comes to just negotiating with Hamas in order to have the hostages back to their houses. But we can see that Benjamin Netanyahu not only hasn't listened, but even he hasn't listened to the people around him, including some of them at the military level, that were saying, yeah, we should find another way to just, guarantee the safety of our citizens. So yeah, Netanyahu is definitely using this, but do not forget that apart from the political survival based on the 7th of October attacks and the fact that Israelis are angry at him by saying you didn't protect us enough, I think there are other also issues that Prime Minister Netanyahu fears he would face if he had to step down as prime minister. What I mean here are corruption issues. I mean, whether when it comes to him or when it comes to his wife, also that is accused of many malversations, or mismanagement of perspective. So all of this makes it important for Netanyahu to keep in power at whatever price at the same time, at the end of the day. And this is where, obviously, and sadly, what we can see is that Prime Minister Netanyahu is using the card of the hostages as a way to say, you see, I am ready to do whatever is possible to free these hostages, but do not forget that Hamas is like Al-Qaeda or Hamas is like ISIS. So it is a way for him to say, you need to back me still. And this is a way for him to say, stop criticizing and stop saying we're gonna put an embargo on the weapons that we sell you or we give you because of what is ongoing in the Palestinian territories. On the contrary, we need them, not only for Palestinians, but also for the other threats. And of course, here, through this, we're also getting back to the question of Iran.
Michigan is a crucial swing state with a significant Arab American population. How do you think inviting Netanyahu would have impacted the sentiments of that community?
Well, I mean, when it comes to, there is also a tricky and not complicated, but at least a very peculiar issue when it comes to the Arab Americans, because I think that Arab Americans reflect perfectly what we have in the Arab world in general, meaning an absence of unity that gets them not to be powerful enough. So what I mean here is that, and it is something that I have studied and I have written about also, and I mean, I try to go into some depth to understand what is it that is going on there. Why don't we have an Arab lobby at the end of the day? Well, we don't have an Arab lobby because you have at the leadership level of some associations or some representations, some civil society organizations, you have every organization that wants to make the difference. This is on the one hand. Then you have the identity part where you have the mix of Muslims, Christians, or Arab Americans, and then Muslim Africans. All of these do not connect at the same level, and they don't have the same sensitivity towards the same causes exactly. And so this is where I think we end up with having a bunch of institutions that exist, and these bunch of institutions is incapable of bringing together all those voices that identify to the same cause. So this is where I think that whatever, and this is a reality, the structural reality of the US, and we've seen it, and the Biden administration has seen it, and this is why it has operated what you were mentioning before when it comes to sending security forces in order to repress the people and that was demonstrating in favor of Palestinians. What is happening there is that we have a situation where since we don't know, we have no strong Arab American institution that can gather all these voices together. This is where we had people that went to demonstrate without having a strong leadership that could tell them, okay, go here and then stick to this limit, for example. You see, so this is where I think that the only impact that could be there is something threatening as what we saw over the last month, meaning that definitely the youth and the less young also expressing a voice that says, okay, let us go now for something coherent, something that is definitely connected or that is based on the defense of human rights and the defense on the right of the people to self-determination, which the US has been defending since 1918 and 1919 and the 18 points of Wilson, the famous Wilson points. But yeah, at the end of the day, I think that to be fair, what we can see happening is that despite the fact that we don't know if the pro-Israeli lobbies in the US represent all Jews of America, and we're quite clear they don't represent all of them, but we don't know whether they represent more than 50% or less than 50%. But still, you have a strong lobby there, and this is where you have a capacity of saying, oh, institutions that are in a capacity of saying, yeah, we are the ones that definitely are serious and do not look for troubles. In front, you could have an activation, a criticism, but at the same time, I think it is time for people that have been claiming for decades now that they want to set a strong and powerful representation to do it seriously now, but they have to agree together.
In one of the conferences in the past, Kamala Harris has pledged unconditional military support to Israel. Now, recently, she prioritized a sorority convention over the speech by the Prime Minister of Israel. My question is, if she is elected president, do you think her Middle East policy will differ significantly from that of Biden's, or will she continue Biden's approach towards Gaza?
I mean, I could be wrong, of course, but what we can see, what we've seen, what we know by experience when it comes to the US, is just like Barack Obama had promised to close Guantanamo Bay and he didn't do at the end of the day. That's because you have a political reality and you have many parameters that impose themselves on any president that comes there. I mean, one of the questions that has, as far as I can understand, has never been sorted out fully is who decides in the US? Is it the president himself or herself, depending on the case, that would go and say, this is how it goes, or is it a bunch of other considerations? My take on this is that it would be a bunch of other considerations that include definitely the long-term interests of the US in itself. And not only my feeling, but also what we can see when it comes to the US is that the US is incapable of disconnecting its own views from what Israel imposes on it when it comes to security, the security track, when it comes to also to the kind of civilizational track. So if you look at the ups and downs that happened, like interestingly under the Bush administration, you had many of the evangelists that went to Israel and went to pray there, etc., waiting for the Messiah to come back, etc. That was a criteria that was more religious, that was more spiritual, but it came together with this commitment, this strong commitment from the Bush administration towards Israel. Under Barack Obama, we've had tensions. So Barack Obama has not followed the same track exactly when it comes to what was showing in terms of communication, when it comes to Israel, I mean. But, I mean, there were tensions between him and between Prime Minister Netanyahu, particularly. But at the same time, it does not mean that that under the Obama administration, the U.S. has stepped back from its support to Israel. On the contrary, there's been also many weapons and shields that have been put, etc. So under Trump, we know also that the Abraham Accords were also linked to this Israeli question. And under Biden, we saw, to be honest, I mean, okay, I haven't heard Biden talking so much when it comes to foreign policy. I've heard more Anthony Blinken talking, but it was a hawkish approach towards the issues of the Middle East. I think I have little doubt about it. This is what we could saw in every press conference or visit that he went for. So will Kamala Harris change on this? Honestly, I'm not sure. It's true that she's taken some distance with Netanyahu since she's been proclaimed representative of the Democrat camp, but at the same time, it does not mean that she's in a capacity to allow human rights to prevail over strategic interests, because she wouldn't be the only one to decide on this.
Final question, Dr. Mikhail. Before leaving Israel for Washington, Netanyahu said that he wants to secure bipartisan support for Israel. When we talk about the Republican Party, Donald Trump accused Netanyahu of disloyalty when he congratulated Biden over his election victory. When we talk about the Democratic Party, Netanyahu criticized Obama's Iran nuclear deal, and then he recently criticized Biden as well when he raised some of his concerns over his policy in Gaza. My question to you, do you think Netanyahu can balance his relationship with both parties if he sticks with the same approach?
I mean, where the risk is limited for Israel is that independently from whether we have a Democrat or a Republican as next president, I think the commitment towards Israel is going to be the same. So maybe, that's what we can see even with the Biden administration. We have an attempt by, I would say more by the Democrats to try and broker a kind of peace initiative or whatever you can see, at least a ceasefire. So this, I think, would keep if we had Kamala Harris winning elections, okay? Meaning that they would try to make the difference. But at the same time, I'm not sure that we could go up to having a situation where there is enough pressure put on Israel to say, just stop with this. I mean, but this is just, a kind of, I mean, it's hard to tell what would happen in the future. But I mean, building on the history of U.S.-American relations, I'm not sure that we are at the tipping point where any U.S. administration would say, you know what, we are losing credit and we are losing our interest with our too much backing of the Israeli policy in a context where we see that tens of thousands of people are dying. And then the other track is when it comes to the Republicans, obviously, Netanyahu cannot say it, but he would prefer Donald Trump to win elections. That makes no doubt, like when you have this debate between Biden and Trump, this catastrophic debate, let's say, the ones that entered history now, but where Trump tells Biden, let's Israel finish the job, I mean, that tells it all. And the commitment of Donald Trump towards Israel is quite evident. We've seen it when he was president, actually in his 4 years of administration or presidency. Like he had a strong commitment towards Israel, and he combined it with what he felt he could obtain from some Arab countries, from here the Abraham Accords. But I mean, Israel knows that if it had to compare between now the options that we have, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, I mean, there is no way to put the two at the same level. Israel is definitely favorable to a victory of the Republicans in this case. And I would say that the interesting thing here, to take it to some historical particularities, is that historically speaking, the Democrats have been more favorable to Israel than the Republicans when you look at it, historically speaking. But now we are at this stage that we could see under Obama already, but we see more now at this stage where definitely we see that Israel, actually, I think since 9/11, this is how it went. Since 9/11, Israel just got the support, a further support, not only of the US in general, but of the Republicans in particular. And this is where I think that, anyway, the nature of the candidate that you have for the Republicans just indicates that Israel would be very favorable to Donald Trump. But obviously, it cannot say it, because if it says it and then Kamala Harris wins, it would be a bit problematic, apart from the fact that diplomatically speaking, there are protocols that Israel can hardly breach, I would say.
Thank you for your time and insights. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.